I've never spoken publicly about what happened to me in 2018. It's funny. People think actors live these perfectly scripted lives. Everything is rehearsed, controlled, every moment a performance. But some experiences, they don't fit into a tidy interview or a late night talk show. Some things are just too dark, too real, and far too impossible to explain in a soundbite. I've kept this story to myself for years, mostly because I was afraid people would just dismiss it. They'd assume it was a marketing stunt for a new movie or some strange, elaborate attempt at publicity. But it wasn't. What I'm about to share actually happened. Or at least, I experienced it as being as real as anything else in my life. There were no cameras, no directors, no special effects. It was just me alone in a hotel room in Wyoming, face to face with something that, to this day, I still can't fully understand. It all began during a winter trip I took right after wrapping a film. I was drained, physically and mentally. The constant motion of Los Angeles, the schedules, the noise. I needed a break. I was craving solitude, genuine peace, and the kind of quiet that only comes with a heavy snowfall. I wanted to see mountains blanketed in white and breathe in that crisp, clean air. So I rented a small, isolated cabin in a remote town just outside of Jackson Hole, Wyoming. It was perfect. For a few days, it was exactly what I needed. I read, I walked in the snow, I just was. The silence was incredible. But then the weather turned. A blizzard rolled in, and it wasn't just any blizzard. The locals said it was the worst they'd seen in years. The wind howled like something alive, and the snow just kept coming down, burying everything. Predictably, my little cabin lost power. At first, I thought I could ride it out. I had a fireplace, some supplies. But as the hours stretched on, the temperature inside plummeted. It became clear it wasn't safe to stay. With the roads completely closed off, my only option was to make my way into the small town and find shelter. There was only one place open, a decades-old hotel called the Frontier Lodge. It had that classic, rustic look, but you could tell it had seen better days. It was worn, a little tired, but it was warm, and that's all that mattered. The man at the front desk was apologetic. Most of the hotel was having heating issues because of the storm, but he had one room left where the heat was still working reliably. Room 219. He handed me an old-fashioned brass key, and I trudged up the creaky stairs, just grateful to be out of the cold. It was only later that I learned from a different staff member that no one ever really wanted to stay in room 219. Apparently, it had a reputation. The first night was quiet enough. The hotel was old, so you expect noises. The floorboards creaked, the wind rattled the window panes, and I could hear the occasional thump and groan of old pipes warming up. I chalked it all up to the building settling, to the storm raging outside. It was actually kind of comforting in a way. I was exhausted, so I fell asleep pretty quickly. But then something woke me up. I glanced at the clock. 3:17 a.m. It was a tapping sound. It was slow, very deliberate. And it wasn't coming from the window or the pipes. It was coming from inside the room, from the closet. I sat bolt upright in bed, my senses on high alert. I just listened, holding my breath. Tap. Tap, tap. It wasn't the sound of a mouse or a branch hitting the side of the building. It sounded exactly like knuckles. Human knuckles rapping on wood from the inside. My mind started racing. Was there another room on the other side of that wall? No, the closet was on an exterior wall. Every instinct in my body screamed that I did not want to open that closet door. My heart was starting to pound. I reached over to the bedside table to turn on the lamp, my hand fumbling for the switch. And that's when I froze. In the faint moonlight filtering through the window, I saw something on the wall above the light switch. Someone had written on it. 3 words, finger drawn through the thin layer of dust on the old, faded wallpaper. It said, "He is here." My heart hammered against my ribs, so hard I thought it would break through. This wasn't right. I was the only one in this room. I'd been in here for hours. I frantically reached for my phone on the nightstand. The screen stayed black. It was completely dead. But that was impossible. It had been plugged in, charging, for hours. It should have been at 1%. And then the tapping from the closet grew louder, faster. It was more frantic now, more urgent. Tap dash tap dash tap dash tap. And just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The silence that followed was somehow even more terrifying. It felt heavy, expectant. I forced myself to move. I slid out of bed, my feet hitting the cold wooden floor. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that I was exhausted from travel and my imagination was running wild. I had to know what was in there. I took a few slow steps toward the closet, my hands shaking as I reached for the doorknob. I took a deep breath and I swung the door open. Nothing. It was completely empty. Just an old metal rack, a single broken wooden hanger dangling from it, and deep, dark shadows. I let out a shaky breath I didn't realize I was holding, a wave of relief mixed with foolishness washing over me. Maybe I was just overtired. Maybe the storm and the strange hotel were getting to me. I was hearing things, seeing things. I closed the closet door, made sure to turn the little lock on the knob, and walked back towards the bed, ready to dismiss the entire thing. And that's when I heard it. It wasn't tapping this time. It was breathing, a slow, heavy, ragged breath. And it was coming from under my bed. I froze again, one foot still in the air. I could feel the sound vibrating through the floorboards. It was a wet, guttural sound, more animal than human. A deep, slow inhale, then a rattling exhale. It was right beneath me. I didn't dare move. I didn't dare look down. Every horror movie trope I'd ever acted in or watched flooded my mind, but this was different. This felt sickeningly real. My body went cold. I knew with absolute certainty that I had to get out of that room. Slowly, carefully, I backed away from the bed, keeping my feet as far from the edge as possible. I didn't look back. I grabbed my jacket and boots, which I'd left by the door, and I ran. I didn't even bother to put them on. I just burst out into the dimly lit hallway, my heart pounding in my ears. I didn't care if it was all in my head, if it was imagined or real. I was not spending another second in that room. I practically flew down the stairs to the front desk. The night clerk was still there, a young guy, maybe 23. He looked up, startled, seeing me standing there, wild-eyed and out of breath. I tried to explain what happened, fumbling over my words, knowing how crazy it must have sounded. Tapping, writing on the wall, breathing under the bed. He had this nervous smile, the kind of smile people give when they're trying to be professional, but are clearly spooked. He tried to joke about the hotel's character, but his eyes told a different story. He agreed to check the room for me. We walked back up the stairs together, the silence punctuated only by our footsteps on the creaky wood. I stood at the doorway, my hand on the frame, refusing to go back inside. He stepped in, looked around, and said, "See?" Nothing. He checked the closet, empty. He looked at the wall where I saw the writing. "Just dust," he said, but I could see he was tense. "I'll check under the bed for you, sir," he said, trying to be reassuring. He got down on his hands and knees and lifted the heavy fabric of the bedskirt. He went completely still. The color drained from his face, and his nervous smile vanished. He just stared into the darkness under the bed for a long moment. Then he slowly pulled his head back out and looked at me, his eyes wide with a fear that mirrored my own. "Sir," he whispered, his voice trembling, You need to see this." I didn't want to. I really, really didn't want to. But I had to. I stepped into the room and knelt beside him. He pointed a shaking finger into the darkness. There, carved into the wooden floorboards under the bed, were 2 words. The letters were deep, jagged, and looked fresh, as if they'd just been gouged into the wood. They said, "Can't stay." I stumbled back. "Someone's messing with me," I said. "This is a prank," but the clerk just shook his head slowly. "Sir, this room has been locked since yesterday morning. No one has been here but you. I didn't sleep the rest of the night." The clerk, bless his heart, let me stay in the lobby. He gave me hot coffee and tried to keep me company, but around dawn, he finally dozed off at the desk. I couldn't blame him. As soon as the sun rose, I went back to the cabin. The power was back on. I tried my best to forget what happened, to push it all down, but for days, I kept thinking about it. The breathing, the words scratched into the wood, the tapping from the closet. I told myself it was just stress, exhaustion, maybe some kind of snow fatigue. I was just seeing things. But 3 nights later, something else happened. I was sitting on the cabin sofa, trying to lose myself in a book, when I heard footsteps outside. Soft, deliberate footsteps, crunching through the deep snow. Human footsteps. I crept to the window and peeked through the curtain. Nothing. Just an endless sea of white wilderness. Then the footsteps came again. Closer this time, right outside the door. And then the doorknob started to move. Slowly, deliberately. My heart was slamming against my ribs. I grabbed the fire poker, my hands shaking. The door shook once, then twice, and then it stopped. Silence, complete, deafening silence. I held my breath, listening, and that's when the whisper came. It wasn't through the door. It wasn't from outside. It came from right behind me. Cano. I spun around, swinging the poker blindly into the empty air. Nothing was there. but a blast of cold wind swirled through the cabin, even though every window was shut tight. That was it. I started packing immediately. I wasn't going to wait around to find out what was stalking me. Minutes later, I threw my bag over my shoulder and stepped outside into the frigid air. The cabin door blew shut behind me with a loud slam, and I heard the lock click. I didn't care. I just hurried toward my rental car, and that's when I saw them. Footprints. A clear trail in the fresh snow leading from the dark line of trees. Straight to my cabin door. They were huge. Deep, long, spaced way too far apart to be human. But the most horrifying part wasn't the footprints themselves. It was that there were no footprints leading back into the forest. Whatever had come toward me had never left. The drive back to Los Angeles took 3 agonizing days. I barely slept. I stayed in crowded, brightly lit motels, kept the lights on all night, and obsessively checked every closet and corner before I dared to close my eyes. Once I was finally back home, I felt safer. The constant noise of the city, the lights, the people, it brought some sense of normalcy back into my life. I eventually convinced myself it had all been in my head, just a cocktail of imagination, fear, and isolation. But the nightmare wasn't over. 2 weeks later, I came home from a late dinner and saw my bedroom light was on. I live alone. My stomach dropped. I crept to the bedroom and slowly pushed the door open. No one was inside, but something was sitting right in the middle of my bed. A folded piece of torn paper. With shaking hands, I picked it up and unfolded it. Scrawled on the paper, in the same jagged, angry letters that had been carved beneath the hotel bed, were 4 words: Room 219 misses you. I dropped the note like it was on fire. My breath caught in my throat. My heart was beating so hard it actually hurt. Something cold and damp brushed the back of my neck. I spun around nothing. But then the balcony door behind me creaked open all by itself. A slow, heavy, groaning sound. A shape was standing outside. It was tall, too tall, and wrongly shaped. Its shadow spilled into the room, long and stretched and unnatural. It didn't move like a person. It twitched. It tilted its head at an impossible angle. It bent slowly, as if its bones weren't made to bend that way. And then it leaned forward, just enough for me to see its face, except it wasn't a face, it was a void. A hollow black emptiness where a face should have been. But I felt it staring at me. I could feel its focus, its hunger. It lifted a long skeletal arm and pressed its hand against the glass door. 5 long fingers left streaks of frost behind on the pane. And then slowly, deliberately, it traced 3 words into the fog glass. Let me in. I backed away, unable to breathe, unable to scream. My mind clung to one single thought. I can't let it inside. If I do, I won't survive. The thing tilted its head again, and a series of cracking sounds echoed from the balcony, like dry wood snapping, and then it whispered. But the whisper wasn't coming from outside anymore. It came from every wall, every corner, every shadow of the room, all at once. You can't leave room 219. Keanu, the lights in the room flickered violently. The air grew so cold I could see my own breath. I grabbed my car keys and I ran. I didn't even bother to close the front door behind me. I just drove, with no destination in mind. Just movement, just escape. I didn't go home for a week. When I finally returned, heart pounding, the balcony door was still wide open, but the glass was clean. The frost writing was gone. The note on the bed was gone too. For months after that, nothing else happened. I started to believe that whatever it was, it had stayed in Wyoming. That demons don't care about geography, and nightmares don't stay behind. A few months later, I was on set filming. A makeup artist came over to me and said quietly, "You didn't tell me you were staying at the Frontier Lodge too." I froze. "I'm not." She looked confused. "That's weird." "The man who brought your coat over earlier said he was from the frontier." Tall guy, black coat, had a strange face. My blood went cold. "What? What kind of face?" Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Well, it didn't look real. I left the set early that day. Every night since then, I feel watched. My reflection in a mirror will linger for a second too long. Shadows in the corner of my eye move when the lights are perfectly still. And sometimes when I'm alone in a hotel room for work, I hear it. Tapping. From inside the closet. Slow. Deliberate. Patient. Just like in room 219. I don't know what followed me from that place. I don't know what it wants. But I know one thing with absolute certainty now. It wasn't the room that was haunted. It was me, and whatever waits in the dark is still waiting, watching, whispering, "He is here."